We've reached the 50 mark, halfway to 100. This is Road Noise, life 1 mile at a time. Hello and welcome again to another episode of Road Noise Life 1 mile at a time. I'm your host, Michael Blackston, and I'm so glad you're alongside me in the passenger seat as we learn to live life 1 mile at a time. As this is being recorded, it's 33 minutes after the hour of 4 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time. I'm headed back to Conway, South Carolina to finish up some work that I didn't get to finish this past week because I just ran out of time. There was a whole lot of work to do. And I'm excited because I had already prepared this episode and made the show notes up, and I'm ready to talk about some stuff because we are at episode number 50 of the Road Noise podcast, and that's a big deal. It may not seem like quite such a big deal to you, but let me tell you why it is a big deal. Most podcasts reportedly end at episode 7 or somewhere in the ballpark of episode number 7. And I've made it all the way to 50, and I made it to 50 on a life journal podcast. This is a life journal podcast. I talk about my life and the things that I'm thinking about. Yeah, lately I've been trying to, well, for a while now, I've been trying to give you content that is helpful to you. I give you a positive review at the end of the show. I tell you a little bit about my week. For the most part, it's a life journal podcast. And to have made it to 50 episodes, and if you listen halfway to 50, it's somewhere in the 20s range, I think. I kind of gave you an ultimatum and said, I haven't heard from anybody and I'm going to stop doing this podcast. And then I kind of backtracked on that and went ahead and said, no, you know what? That's not what this is about. It's not about me becoming famous or popular with this podcast. It's not about having 2,000 listeners per week. It's about those who are interested and those who do want to hear it, even if it's only one of you. It's about you, and it's about you sitting alongside me. Like I said, learning life 1 mile at a time. And so I continued it, and right now, as it stands, I still continue to want to do this podcast. I bought my new headset microphone, so I'm hands-free now. I don't have to hold the SM58. My wife said she liked the way it sounded when she listened to it, so we're going to plug along and go on, and I'm not quite at the year mark because 52, obviously, 52 weeks in a year is the year mark. So in a couple of weeks, I'm probably going to do like a year in review type of show. But right now, I want to talk about milestones because 50 is a milestone. It's halfway to 100. This time next year, I will be celebrating 3 digits of episodes of the Road Noise podcast. And so to get halfway there, it just feels really good. So let's talk about milestones. And I thought everybody has milestones. You don't think about them a whole lot, I don't think. Most of us are looking at what's right in front of us. You know, you've got your future, you're planning for, you're trying to just get along one day at a time. We don't look backward a whole lot and look at the things in our lives that have made a difference and kind of molded who we are. And I think that in life we put mental pins on the roadmap of our life to show these significant points in our life and to pinpoint them and say, this made a difference in my life. So I brought a list along with me of, 7 of them. 7 things in my life that are milestones. They're kind of random. There are a whole lot of milestones in my life I could point to, but these are just 7 of them that I thought were big ones that you might find interesting. And as a little tease, when I get to the last one, you're going to finally get a little bit more insight about my spiritual life, and because a really big one in my life, I will list it. Number 7. This might be a little bit toward the end more of a spiritual episode than it has been before. And I'm also going to read some feedback that I got on iTunes a while back, and I've been meaning to give this feedback a shout out, so I'm going to do that toward the end of the episode as well. But let's talk about milestones. The very first one I've got listed here is my first solo performance. If you listen to this podcast long enough, you know that my heart's love is the stage. It's theater. It's performing. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a stage. It can just be in front of a microphone at a podium. I mean, that's why I'm doing this podcast. I could write this stuff down in a regular journal, and I kind of go back and forth writing in journals and not writing in journals, and I've kind of shied away from writing in my journals now because I stay so busy writing other things like my novel and plays and stuff like that. But I could do that, but I prefer to be in front of a microphone. And so I started this podcast really as an exercise to give my children and anybody that I leave behind something to remember me by. Something where they can go and listen to my voice, and not just the same thing over and over again. But that's one of the reasons I keep doing episode after episode. Even though I have a small listenership, I do have loyal listenership, and it grows every week. Every week I get at least 1 to 2 new subscribers and people who are listening and downloading every episode. So it's growing and compounding on itself, and it's small, but it's growing. But the main reason I started it in the first place was so that the people that I leave behind would have a documentation, an audio documentation. My wife, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, that can go back into an archive and say, that was my ancestry, and I've got a lot of neat stuff I can look into their lives at their time, what things were like. Because really, think about it. 50 years from now, life's going to be a lot different. The world will be almost unrecognizable from us as fast as technology is growing and the things around us, if the world is even still here. And I kind of went off on a rabbit trail there, but I'm just explaining why my being a performer is important to me. That's why I chose this avenue to document my life at this point in my life. So at number 1, my first solo performance was an important moment for me, and I remember it probably so vividly because, even though I was about 5 years old, because it set the course for a lifelong love of performance and the stage. And it was not really that big a deal. It was a little solo performance of a song called Dead-Eye Dick. I'm not going to sing it, but because it's really a silly song. But I remember it, and I guess part of the quirkiness of the song is probably part of the reason I remember it so vividly. But I performed it at the Civic Center of Elberton, Georgia, among some group that was having a little talent show type thing. Different people were performing, and my mom, for some reason, signed me up to sing Dead-Eye Dick. It's about a little cowboy, and I remember I had my cowboy hat on and my little cowboy outfit, and I remember even going to the store to get my little cowboy revolvers that I wore on the side. It was an adorable little song, and I remember it as a milestone in my life, as the starting point, the getting out of the gate of performing, because from that moment on, that's, I think, when the applause of an audience and honestly the narcissistic value of being told how good they thought I did, that's what struck that. That's what lit that fire under me that said, this is awesome. I love this. I love standing up here and commanding an audience. And so that first solo performance is number 1 in the milestones that I want to mention today. Number 2 is getting beat up by the little girl next door. Again, it was right around close to the same age as when I was doing my first solo performance. This time in my life, I had fallen in love with the girl next door. Her family and my family kind of had an off and on relationship early going. Later on, it was just off. But early on in the going, when they moved in next to us, I was a year older than her. And at this time, I was probably 7. She was probably 8. Maybe I was 6. She was 7. Something like that. Anyway, the neighbors' kids and me and my sister and the guy that lived on the other side of us kind of had this... We would play with each other, and then the next day we would be enemies. I really don't understand it. I was so young. All I know is that me and this young lady, little girl, would play together, and we even were going together. She was my girlfriend. I was going to marry her. It was, that was the way it was when we were 6 and 5 years old. We were just kids. But one day, it was one of those off days where we were enemies. I don't know what was going on. I didn't think we were enemies, but all of a sudden the older kids were wanting to pick a fight with my sister and the older kid that lived on the other side of us. Well, all of a sudden, this young girl crossed over the wooden fence that we had separating the property lines, and she called me over. Now, we had been playing. I was going to marry this little girl. And she called me over, and she said loudly, "I'm going to beat you up." Actually, it's not what she said. She said some stuff that little girls that little ought not say. But anyway, she said she was going to beat me up. Well, here's why this is a milestone for me. I had always been taught you don't hit a female. Unless it was my sister. I fought with my sister all the time, but you don't hit another girl. You don't hit a woman. I had always heard that. I had lived only a short time so far, but that had been an understanding. I'd been taught that you don't hit. If you're a guy, you don't hit a girl. And I was not going to hit her. But she said, "I'm going to beat you up." And I said, I don't want to fight you. She said, "Well, I'm going to beat you up." And she pushed me down. And that's why this is a milestone in my life, because I remember not understanding what was going on, why this was happening. I remember being hurt and heartbroken that this was going on. I didn't know why this little girl, my friend, was suddenly being this way. And I understand what it was now. I know exactly what it was. She was showing out for her sister and her brother. She was trying to get that sibling initiation to show that she was part of their clan. I understand that. But at the time, I was confused, but I refused to hit her. And so I said, "Do what you're going to do. I'm not going to hit you." She pushed me down, and she jumped on top of me and straddled my chest and began to punch me in the face with both hands. Punch, punch, punch. And I remember starting to cry. I don't even think it hurt that bad. She never even bruised me, I don't think. She wasn't hitting that hard. Come to think of it, she probably didn't want to hit that hard. She was probably trying to just play this thing out in front of her brother and sister so they'd see something and be proud of her, but she didn't really want to hurt me. I think my tears came mostly from not understanding why this was happening. And so here's this little boy laying on the ground. I could have easily pushed her off of me and fought back, but I refused. And I was not going to do it. And that's a milestone in my life, because I remember that day as the day that I put something into practice that I had always known to be true. You don't hit a girl. You take it. It's the first day I ever really physically, literally, turned the other cheek. She pounded me with her fists, and I let her, because I knew I would get through it, and I knew it was painful then, but I was not willing to hurt her. And I'm proud of that, because that has stuck with me, and it really was the agent of cementing that into my mind, that this is the type of man I want to be, the type of male I want to be as I grow up, is I'm going to stand by that conviction to never hit another woman. So that's number 2. Number 3 was taking my green belt test with a broken arm, and I passed. When I was probably about 11 years old, somewhere around that age range, my mom got me into karate. I wanted to take karate, and it was the form of Korean karate called Taekwondo. I don't even know if you would call it karate. I think karate is more specific to a region. Taekwondo, martial arts. And it is a Korean form. I took it for a while, and I was doing well, and my father was taking it with me. It's one of the bonding moments I remember between me and my father. He took it with me, and somewhere along when I was 12 or 13 years old, I fell and broke my arm. And it was a really bad break. I broke both of the bones just above my wrist. It was a lower arm fracture, but it was a complete break, and it broke both of the bones in my lower arm, just above the wrist. So that the initial thought was Michael's going to have to stop Taekwondo for a while. Well, that was an option, to stop taking it for a while, miss my green belt test, and just have to take a little bit longer to get the test and wait till I healed. That was okay, and everybody was going to be okay with it, but I said, can't I just keep taking it? Well, the teacher made it clear to me that that's fine. If I wanted to continue taking the training, I could. He could train me around that broken arm, but it was going to mean doing things more difficultly. Is that a word? More difficultly? Everything I was going to be doing was going to be more difficult because I was going to only have one arm to do it with. For instance, I was going to have to learn to block with only my left hand when I sparred, which is a controlled fighting at the end of every session. I was going to have to be able to keep my body turned to the side where I could use my left hand to block because it was my right arm that was broken. I was going to have to learn to do that, and I was going to have to take it and be a part of the class just like everybody else. He warned me there would be no leniency just because I had a broken arm if I chose to continue the training. That meant I was going to have to learn to do one-armed push-ups. Well, I've always just been a driven sort, and I've always said there's nothing I can't do. There are things that I didn't care to do, so I didn't try. I was never into sports. I liked playing football in the backyard. I was okay with baseball in the backyard. I've never cared for being pitched at because, frankly, I don't like the idea of getting hit with a ball. And so I've had a little bit of being scared of the ball. But if I'd put my mind to it, I would have been able to do it. I put my mind to karate or to Taekwondo. And I said, it doesn't matter, leniency or not. I don't want you to be lenient. I just want to continue my training, get my green belt, and continue on. So that's what I did, and I went through the classes with my arm in a cast, and I learned to do all those things. I learned to do one-armed push-ups, and I learned to fight with one arm in a cast and blocking with the other and punching with the other, until it came to my green belt test, and they were a little concerned that I was going to be able to pass my test like this because I was going to be judged by Korean national judges. These were actually national Korean nationals. They were from Korea, and they were masters of this craft, and they are known for being picky. So it was not that they were afraid that I wasn't good or good enough to pass my test, because they'd seen that I had really excelled and done well even with the broken arm. But they were just concerned that these Korean judges were going to be so picky and that they were not going to care that I had a broken arm, which they didn't, but they did. In the end, they were just afraid that they were going to be so picky that the arm was going to end up being something that hurt my chances at getting my green belt. Anyway, the time came, and I was taken to the belt test. And because these were Korean nationals, they saw several different schools at one time. Everybody was put together. There were, I think, 2 or 3 different schools, including ours, that all did our tests at one time in front of these Korean judges. And it came my time to go. We did everything. I had to break boards. I did my kicks. I was able to do my forms and everything I needed to do with one arm. And I did the push-ups that were required, the number of push-ups correctly performed, because you can perform push-ups incorrectly. Ask anybody who knows anything about push-ups and you've seen people or done them yourself incorrectly. You know what the correct form is, you know what it's not. I had to do it with the correct form and the required number of them. I was able to do that. I was able to keep up with my fellow classmates, and then it came time to spar. And I sparred another man, or another young man, my age, from a different class. And I won the match with technically one hand tied behind my back. It was in front of me in a cast, but I was not able to use it. And I had become so adept at keeping my body positioned to block and punch using my left arm and my left fist. And of course, all of my feet worked and the rest of my body worked. The Korean judges actually complimented me on my ability to adjust to this situation, and I passed that test with flying colors. And so that serves as a milestone to me, and I think that I haven't thought a lot about that particular episode in my life, but at the same time, I think now, as I meditate on it a little bit, that moment and that time in my life having to get through doing all of that stuff with a broken arm is one of the things that showed me, that taught me, that anything is possible if you put your mind to it and you're dedicated and you're willing to go through the struggles and sometimes the pain that goes along with something that's worthwhile. And because I learned that I could do that and I found success with it, I decided at an early age there's nothing that I can't do if I set my mind to it. If I'm interested and I want it, I can go get it regardless of my circumstances. And it taught me that, and I am grateful of that. And that's why number 3 milestone in my life that I'm talking about today is the time I took my test and passed in Taekwondo. And I said in here that it was my green belt test, but now that I think back on it, I want to say it was my blue belt test. I was going from green to blue. Number 4 milestone on my list is I got married to the first girl I ever dated, and on top of that, it was a blind date. My wife, Kayla, and I have been married for over 20 years. I think 21 years, because we were married in March of 1995. It's 2016, so we've been married over 21 years. This March it'll be 22, and it just keeps getting better. But it was a blind date. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the details of what happened and how I met her and all of that stuff, because that's all available in an earlier episode. I can't remember what it was. I should have looked that up before I started before I started recording this, so that I could have listed exactly what episode that is in case you're interested in going back to listen to it. But I was working at a radio station. She was a listener. I was the DJ. She called up for some concert information. I liked her voice, and the rest is history. I started flirting and talking to her, and she started calling back. And after about 6 months of going back and forth on the phone, I had never seen her. This was before the internet, so I couldn't look her up on Facebook or anything like that. I think she did mail me a picture of herself, like one of her graduation photos. She was a senior in high school, so I think she mailed me. I've still got that photograph. But I think she mailed it to me before I saw her, so it wasn't completely blind, but it was just about blind, and she had never seen me before. She was my first for everything. I was her first for everything. She's the first girl I ever held hands with, the first girl I ever kissed. She's the first for everything. Yeah, even that. She's the first for all of the good stuff. And we hold that as special to us, that we were each other's first for everything. It was just such a pure situation from the start. I grew up, I have an episode called Dealing with Divorce. I grew up as a child of divorce. My mom and my dad were not married for most of my life. It was just a short period in my life. Right after I was born, then they divorced and got remarried later, and then married for 2 or 3 years, and then got divorced again. And that was all. For most of my life, my mom and my father were not married. And it meant a lot for me to find a woman that I loved enough, that it was true love, that I would be willing to go through the good things and the bad. All the things they say in the wedding ceremony, in good times and bad. I wanted to go through the bad times with a woman and not feel like I had to separate or divorce from her, because it was so prominent such a fixture in my life. And it wasn't, I don't blame anybody for it, it's just the way it worked. And there are a lot of lessons I learned through all of that. But I didn't want that to be part of my life. I wanted to make sure the woman I found was the woman I was going to be with for the rest of my life. And I found her. And we've been married for 21 and a half years. And it just keeps getting better. I won't say that there haven't been bumpy roads. There have always been bumpy roads, but there have always been smooth roads too. And through the grace of God, and because we are both Christians and we both put God up at the top of our lives, there's a triangle. It's God at the top, me at the bottom on one side, and Kayla at the bottom on one side, so that God is always at the top. That pyramid of life is stable. You know, if you put God at the bottom of the pyramid and you turn that pyramid upside down so that you've got God, and then you've got 1 point at the bottom and then 2 points at the top with you and your wife or your significant other, whatever, that's not stable. It's going to tip one way or the other. Things get broken. But if you keep God at the top, you've got that solid, stable foundation across the bottom. And that's the way we've always looked at it. And I wish that I could say that that analogy and that visual came from me, but it does not. It comes from Chip Ingram, who is a favorite pastor of mine. Number 5, the birth of my son. I am a man who has always wanted a son, wanted to carry on the Blackston name. And my son Noah, you've heard him here on the podcast. He is one of 3 highlights of my life. My wife and my 2 children are the most important things to me besides God. And I had a son 12 years ago. August was his birthday. He turned 12. He's growing up so fast. He's a little man now. He and I butt heads a lot now. He's getting to be he's a preteen. So he's getting to the age where there's a lot of angst, and he's having to battle through a lot of stuff. He's got a lot of emotions going on, and he and I butt heads quite a lot, as any father and son are going to do. But I make sure that I love on him. I physically hug him. I still kiss him. I tell him every day, I love you. I never want it to be said that I never want him to be able to say, I never remember my dad saying I love you. I can say that. I hate to have to say that because I love my dad and my dad loves me. But the word love between me and my dad is very often, it's rarely uttered. And most of the time it's written, you know, in a Facebook message or something like that, or a text, love you, you know, something like that. I don't remember ever hearing my dad. I don't have any audible memories of my dad saying I love you. I love you. And it's not, I don't hold that against him. My dad is not that kind of a person. He loves, but he shows it in different ways, and he's just not very verbal when it comes to that type of thing. And because of that, and because he and I kind of had a strained relationship, or not strained, I don't want to say that. I never was upset with my dad. A distant relationship. A lot of our lives have been kind of distant. That's just not something between us. So I want to make sure that my son always knows and always has memory after memory and place after place he can go in his mind, and even hear from this podcast to hear that I love him. So I'm going to actually say that right now. Son, if you're listening to this on down the line, years from now, or next week, I love you. I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you. Oh, you make me so proud. And I love you so much. And I just want that to be a part of his life. I want, when I'm gone, for him to say, one thing I can tell you, my dad was not afraid to show and tell me of his love for me. A little bit about him. He's a gamer. He loves the video games. That's really all he thinks about, and I understand it. This day and age, I can't just let him go and wander all over the neighborhood like we were able to at his age when I was growing up, and I hate that. He yearns for that, and I'm trying my best to find different ways and things to interest him, that he and I can go out when we have the opportunity and get some fresh air and do something other than video games and staying shut up in that. And to be honest, and to his credit, The second I give him the opportunity to go out and do something and get his body moving and get some fresh air and stuff, he wants to do that. It's usually, I hate to say it, me when I refuse to do something because it's too hot or something like that. I have a really hard time, and a lot of time it has to do with my skin. I have a really hard time with the heat. It doesn't just make me miserable, it makes me sick if I get overheated too easily. So this summer has been really difficult for us, and he spent a lot of times on those video games because the heat has been so bad this year. This summer has been so hot and muggy and humid. It's been miserable all summer long. So I'm really looking forward to this fall and this winter where he and I can get out and get our bodies moving. Also, he is a performer. He's taken that part of my life. My son has become a performer. There's another milestone in my life, getting to watch him perform, because that's such an important part for me. He is so good at it. By the time he's my age, he's going to have well surpassed me. Number 6, I had a daughter. The birth of my daughter Merida, it's the same thing. She's growing up way too fast. At this recording, she's 3.5 years old, and she's showing signs of being a talented artist just this week. I'll talk about that a little bit later on with a little more detail, but she is a talented artist just this week. They took some video of her doing some drawing at 3.5 years old that was really good, and she gets that from Daddy. And she's seen me watching Bob Ross, the guy with kind of big curly fuzzy hair that does the Happy Trees. He has passed now, but she really enjoys that show, and I learned a few months ago that she might have a propensity to artwork because she was taking some of his techniques and mimicking them with some brushes that she found just after watching some of his shows, and it made me so proud. And I think she's going to be the artist. And again, I'll tell you a little bit about that when I tell you about my week here in just a little bit. But I want to go ahead and get to the last one on the list, which is number 7. 7, the number of perfection, and it's apropos that this would be the milestone I'll list at number 7. And I'm going to go back to my childhood, and it's the day I gave my life to Jesus Christ. Now, this is what I was telling you about earlier, that I'm going to get a little spiritual here. On this podcast, this is a podcast that is a life journal podcast. It is family-based, Christian-based, because I am a family person and, more importantly, a Christian person. But I don't push that and even mention it very often, and it's not because I'm trying to keep it hidden. It's just I'm trying to live my life as a Christian and let you find that in the stories and in my attitude and in the things I say without being preachy, because I can be preachy, and there may be a podcast one of these days where it's all about the gospel and my love for Christ and what I know of Christ and getting the gospel out and the Christian message. But that's not what this is about. This is about my life as I live it day to day. So Christ pops in there quite often, but I don't dwell on it. However, I'm going to talk pointedly about my love and giving my life to Jesus Christ as a Christian right now at number 7 as the milestone in my life, and the most important milestone of my life. You might say, well, wait a minute, are you talking about your meeting your wife and the birth of your children? Wouldn't those be the most important milestones in your life? No, they're not. They are important, and they're right there behind this. But number 1 in my life, for me, because of the way I believe as a Christian, is giving my life to Jesus Christ. Because to me, the most important day in any person's life is the day they separate themselves from the world and give their heart to God. They connect back with God and accept the gift of salvation and basically earn their ticket, or not earn anything. We don't earn anything. Jesus earned it on the cross, but get that ticket to heaven and get that connection to God that is through Jesus Christ. The bridge to God that is Jesus Christ is the most wonderful thing. And for someone who really receives the Holy Spirit and gives their life to God, once that happens for you, you'll understand why it's the most important time and the biggest milestone in your life. For me, it was back in when I was 12 years old. And I want to say it was a Bible school, or it may have been a revival service or whatever, but I remember it clicking that I needed to not just know who Jesus was, and I wasn't a Christian just because my parents went to church or because I went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, because that's how my mom did it. She had us there every time the doors were open, and I'm so thankful for that. But there's a moment in a Christian's life where it clicks that you need salvation, that you need to ask God into your life, and you need to accept His gift. And I was about 12 years old, and I remember going up to the front of the altar, or the front of the church at the altar, and asking God into my life. And so I became saved at the age of 12 years old. But right after that, it clicked, but it didn't have the meaning yet. I didn't understand what it meant to get saved and to be saved. So I lived my life as any 12-year-old boy will do, and I grew up, and I did all the things 12-year-old boys do, and I said the things that I ought not say, and acted the ways that I ought not way when I could ought not do when I could get away with it, that most boys growing up will do. I mean, we're fleshly, we're worldly, and the things of the world are fun to us. And at that age, as you're growing and trying to figure things out, a lot of times spiritual things are in the back of your mind. And I fell away. I don't believe in getting unsaved, but I did fall away from God, and I would have defended Him to my dying breath to anybody who was trying to talk me out of the existence of God or even Jesus and being saved. I knew that I was saved, but I wasn't acting that way. And it got worse and worse, and there was a time in my life, up until July 21st, 2001, where my wife would often tell me she was embarrassed at something I'd said. I was embarrassing her in front of people. She was ashamed of me at times. And I said, I'm a Christian, but I'm blah, blah, blah. Made all the excuses that I needed to make, that I thought I needed to make. Working at the radio station, performing an overnight radio show and saying things that really could have gotten me fired had the bosses been up at night listening to, but it's obvious they really weren't paying attention like they needed to be because nobody ever said anything to me. We were at a revival one evening. I remember it was a Friday night. My job at the radio station was Friday night, Saturday night, midnight to 6. So I would go in at midnight Friday night, or if you want to be technical, midnight Saturday morning, and I would work midnight to 6. Then I would go in the next day, Saturday morning into Sunday morning, or Saturday night into Sunday morning, midnight to 6. So this was a Friday night revival, and I was getting ready to finish church and then go in to doing all the stuff I had no business doing and saying at the radio station for my second job. And an old country preacher really hit the nail on the head and really struck a chord with me. Flipped a switch. It was amazing. It was miraculous to me. The mindset change that happened in that moment. When he said, the word Christian is not taken as seriously as it should be. The word Christian means little Christ. That means while we are in our flesh and while we are going to be of the world and full of sin because we're flesh while we're on this earth, we'll never be perfect until we're taken up with Him. But until then, we're to at least strive to not be better than anybody else, but at the same time, and what I mean by that is not to be pious and turn our nose up at people and think we're better than other people. That's not what Christians are called to do. We're called to be humble servants, in fact, because Christ came the first time as a humble servant. He will return as a victorious king, but He came the first time as a humble servant, and that was to model for us how we are to be. And we're to be a humble servant and Christ-like if we're to call ourselves Christians. He said, if you're calling yourself a Christian and you're living the opposite life outside of this church. You come to church, you say the right things, you sing the songs, you call yourself a Christian, but you don't live that lifestyle, then you're living a lie. And he made it very clear that we either were to call ourselves Christians and live like Christians, or if we weren't going to live like Christians, don't call ourselves Christians at all. And so it flipped a switch. And I told my wife as we went out, I said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but when I go to work tonight, I'm going to quit. And she said, what? And I explained to her what was going on, and I told her that I didn't feel like I could just change things there, because it wasn't a matter of changing just what I was saying, but the radio station was promoting things that I didn't think that at that time would be flavorful for a Christian to be promoting. And I said, you know what? I'm not condemning that radio station, but I'm condemning me at that radio station. I want to change. I want to quit cold turkey. I want to start this thing over. I want to rededicate my life to Christ as I should have been living this whole time. And on July 21st, 2001, I rededicated my life to Christ, and my life changed. Now, there have been struggles. If you listen to my episode about my addiction to pornography, you'll know there have been struggles. But I have felt comfortable in knowing that I am trying to live my life. And I've lately kind of backed away a little bit more than I wanted to. I've not been reading my Bible and conversing with Christ. I've not gone to church on Sunday mornings like I needed to. Not because I think that church does anything to save anybody, but I believe that I need to be in communion with my fellow worshipers, and I need to want to be at the place where everybody is there for one reason and one reason only, and that is to worship and lift up the name of God and to lay our burdens at the cross. I believe that's important, and yet I've fallen away. And here in the last just few days recently, I won't call it another rededication, but another affirmation, another coming back, another instance of the prodigal son not stepping nearly as far away, but stepping just a few steps away, but coming back and taking hold to God's hand and saying, no, I want you to be the top in my life. I want to live my life for you, because me living my life for you sets an example for others around me, so that the light of God, the hope and the promise of salvation and eternal life will shine through me like a beacon to others who are lost. I want to be that beacon for you, God, and so I've come back to Him recently, and that's why I put as number 7, the number of perfection. My most important milestone in my life was my salvation and my life with God. But the day I first gave myself to God and said, I submit to you, and I thank you, and I accept your gift of salvation that you gave, your sacrifice on the cross for my sin. Now, I'm going to lay this out there. I don't do this in every episode, but I do want to do this in this episode, since this last segment here. I still don't get much feedback. I don't get much feedback at all. I don't get any feedback at all, really, save this one that I'm going to tell you about in just a minute. But if there was ever a time I really urge you to give me some feedback, it's if you're listening to this and you want to know more about Jesus. Again, this podcast is not a witnessing podcast, but if you just listen closely to what I said, I want my life, and this is a journal of my life, I want my life to reflect God. I want my life to reflect my love and my passion for Jesus Christ. And I want His light to shine through me, so if it has, And if you're curious, or if you have anything to say on the matter, I urge it. Now, I'm not going to debate anybody. I will absolutely not pay any attention to any negative stuff. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. But if you are interested, if you have questions, honest questions, if you would like me to pray for you, if you would like me to add you to, or something in your life, to the prayer list at our church so that others are praying for you, if you would like to come to Christ yourself but don't know how, any of those things, I beg you to go ahead and get in touch with me. And at the end of this episode, please stick around to the end of the episode, because I'm going to give you all of the ways to get in touch with me, and then we'll talk about it. I will reach out to you personally in this situation. I will absolutely reach out to you personally if you have some questions or comments or anything at all that you would like involving the Lord and Savior of this world, Jesus Christ. Because you too can be forgiven, you too can be saved, you too can live forever in the loving arms of Christ. I can tell you how. And even if you're not sure it makes any sense, I am a student of biblical apologetics, which is the defense of the Bible and kind of explanation. If you're one of those people who requires a little more explanation, I got that for you. Love to talk to you about that on that subject. So please reach out to me, and I'll tell you how you can do that in just a little bit. Now, I do want to go ahead and read this feedback that I got from my good friend Zach Gerald on iTunes. He went out and left a 5-star review for me. So Zach, thank you so much for that 5-star review. Let me read it to you. It says, Road Noise has quickly become one of my go-to podcasts for when I need something to listen to for a trip down the road. Michael does a wonderful job at selecting topics that seem personal to him, but also provide something for any listener to identify with. This podcast has become like my co-pilot for trips to the next town over, only the faint, quote-unquote, road noise that comes through the speakers has caused me to do the occasional double take on the road. Last, I find his positive review at the end of every episode to be useful. A couple of them have led me to other podcasts that I have enjoyed so far. So Zach, thank you so much for leaving me that kind review, and I'd love for you to give me your review on iTunes. And if it's not positive, I'll take it. You know, I want to be real here. I want to be legitimate. I don't want to just ask you just to give me a 5-star review. If you want to give me a 5-star review, I'm loving it. But if you've got a critique, I want to hear it. Now, if it's something that you think I could fix, please let me know via the feedback, and we'll go that route, because it might be something that you can point out to me that I say, hey, you know, you're right. Now, I'm not going to change everything I do just because one person says it, but you might have an idea for something on the show that will make it better, that will be an immediate improvement, and I will absolutely take that to the bank and run with it. I just got to know what it is, if it's something you want to let me know about. So coming up here in just a couple of minutes now, I've got to tell you a little bit about my week, and then the positive review, and then we're going to go and end this episode because we are at an hour now, almost. So this week, since the last time I recorded an episode 49, I recorded it on the way home from Conway, and it's only been 2 days from that time that I'm recording this episode. But I got a chance to watch a video of my daughter drawing. For the first time really drawing. She's been like any other 3-year-old and just kind of scribbled some stuff on paper and just kind of randomly watching the pen or pencil make marks. I guess you might say a milestone happened this week earlier. She was staying with my mom, and my sister lives with my mom right now. And my sister took a video on her phone and shared it with me and on Facebook of her drawing for the first time. Drawing a person, and yeah, it looked like a little small child drawing it. But the difference, the light switch turning on from her going scratch, scratch, scratch just to see it make a mark, to drawing circles and then eyes and then a mouth and a nose and ears at 3.5 years old, I think that's pretty darn good. The control as an artist, and this is not just me being daddy, because I said, okay, yeah, I love that as daddy, and the fact that I'm daddy and I'm an artist and now she's doing art. I wanted to also analyze it and say, okay, let me look and see. Let's try to step out of the daddy skin and look at this from the perspective of what she's doing, the control she's having and manipulating her tool to make this drawing. And as I did that, I noticed she really has great command, understanding, and control. She's a very visual little girl anyway, and so I'm so excited. It brought me to tears. I'm so excited that perhaps my daughter is going to follow in her dad's footsteps of being an artist. And that's really all I have. We got together as a family both days, Saturday and Sunday. I was on the way home Friday night, went to bed and got up Saturday. Had a day. We kind of went out and did some shopping and stuff like that with my family. Then went out to eat, watched the Georgia Bulldogs on TV. But then yesterday rolled around, and we spent more time with my family, spending a lot of time with my mom, who is struggling with cancer right now. And I'm going to ask you for prayer for her. She's struggling. She's taking immunotherapy treatments, and she's having to deal with side effects from that. And so she has good days, and then she has some days that are kind of a little hard on her. And I just pray for her well-being and for her healing and for her comfort and peace. And I covet your prayers in that situation as well. This week's positive review is for an app I found on my phone this week that is going to be a game changer in my career. It's called Sketch Guru. What Sketch Guru does is it takes a photograph and it turns it into a sketch or a watercolor or all kinds of different little filters you put on it. You might think, well, a lot of apps do that, Michael. Don't think that's such a big deal. For me, it is, because the way it does sketching, taking a photograph and turning it into a sketch, it does really well with that. And once it does it and you apply the filter, then you can go into a little settings down there and change the degree to which the sketch is done and stuff like that. So you have a little control over it. It's a free app. Again, it's called Sketch Guru. Here's why it's going to be a game changer for me in my job. Part of my job is doing layouts. It used to be that we did full-size layouts for these tombstones where we had this huge roll of paper and you had to draw it out on the roll of paper. I have conditioned all of my clients now. I finally got all of my clients on board for letting me send them things through email, because with the big layout, you have to send it via regular mail, and you have to send it. Customer wants changes, they have to send it back, you have to do it. The thing gets ratty, nasty looking, smeared, and goes back and forth and takes weeks and weeks to get approvals. I can get an approval sometimes in a day through an email. It requires me to draw something on a piece of paper, or on my iPad in the sketchbook app I have on my iPad, which doesn't do a great job unless you're really taking a lot of time. And I can scan it and email it. That's not that big a deal, because most of the time it's quicker for me to just whip something out on a piece of paper as a sketch. But there are times when it gets very time consuming and I hate doing it. For instance, portraiture. What I have to do with portraiture is I basically will make a carbon copy, or not a carbon copy, but a Xerox copy, and then I will trace out all of the essential details, the eyes, nose, mouth, all those things that you don't want to get wrong with carbon paper onto a regular piece of paper. Then I will take my pencil and my smudging tool and I will render a portrait with those basic outlines. And I'll make it look like a fairly nice pencil portrait. That takes a while, and I hate doing it because I don't charge enough for it. And customers are so picky, they don't realize I've traced it. They'll tell me I've gotten something wrong. The shape of the face is not right, even though I did it exactly from the picture because I traced it. The mouth is not exactly right, even though I did it exactly from the picture because I traced it. And if I were doing these pencil renderings as works of art to hang on the wall, I wouldn't even do the tracing part of it, because I would feel like I would need to give them a complete natural work of art. I would do it like I have been trained to do and sketch everything out with a pencil from the start. But in order to save time, and because when I do portraits on stone, I actually just take the photograph that they've given me and trace it onto the stone first so that I've got all the proportions right. I have to do that. There's no erasing. There's no fixing. You got to get it right the first time, and so it's simpler for me to trace it out with white carbon on the stone. Well, if I'm doing that on the stone, I might as well get started with the portraits the same way just to get them an approval. I really don't see the need to do that because it's all tracing, but the customer insists on it. So I said, I want a way to simplify it. I started looking up ways to make photographs into sketches. So I found the Sketch Guru app, and it works wonderfully. I can take it and then do a layer on Photoshop so that it's just light. So basically what it does is it takes the printing out and tracing out for me, and some of the very basic highlights, it's already there for me, and it already looks like a sketch. So basically all I got to do is take my pencil and fill it out a little bit. It cuts the work time in more than in half. I'll probably be spending a third. I did one of them this weekend for the first time, and it cut it a third of the way. It is going to be, it's something to play around with for most people, but for somebody like me, it is going to be one of the most valuable tools I have in my tool belt. And it's also going to be good for when I need to take, customers will send 20 different photographs, and they'll say, I want this truck here, by a stream here, and then I want you to take this deer here and put it next to the stream on the other side, and I have to draw all that stuff out. What I'll be able to do now is draw the basic out thing, like the scene, the lake, or the stream, or whatever, and when I need to add the truck, it still needs to be a sketch. I can take in Sketchbook app the truck, Sketchbook app the deer, Sketchbook app, and just pop them in wherever I want. And there are other applications that's just going to be wonderful for me. For when people want to see a sketch, but it's really not necessary to do a sketch, but they got to see it anyway, it's going to save me oodles and oodles of time. And that's why this week's positive review is the Sketch Guru app that you can get on your phone and whatever else you need. So this has been a long episode, an hour-long episode, and I thank you so much for sticking with me. If you have, and you remember I was talking about, if you have any questions about the Christian lifestyle or Jesus or any of that stuff, I'll be glad to answer them for you. Or if you have anything else that you want to talk about, if you want to tell me your milestones, what are some of your milestones? They're important to you, they're important to me. I want to get to know you. Yes, this podcast is about being an archive for my family, for the future generations that carry on the Blackston name or have my DNA. Yeah, that is what this podcast is originally and mostly for, but it is also to meet with you, to get to know you. If you listen to the sound of my voice, if you look forward to Mike Blackston, if you feel like my life now is something that you know a little bit about, if you feel like you know me through this podcast, get to know me a little better. I'm just like you, and I want to be your buddy. I want to be your friend. I want to know you. I can only do that if you'll get in contact with me, and here's how you can do it. Through my feedback email address, it's feedback@michaelblackston.com. That's feedback@michaelblackston.com. You can also contact me through the website, which is roadnoisepodcast.com. If you go to roadnoisepodcast.com, that's a central place where you can share me on Facebook, you can share me on Reddit, you can share me anywhere on Twitter, tweet stuff about it. You can share me on your social media right there from the roadnoisepodcast.com website. In fact, I'm going to give you a little bit of information. I've got, you can pin it. By the way, I want you to pin it. I would love for you to pin it. That's been a really good way to get the podcast across. And Pinterest has become a great way for podcasters to get their message out there. I have a pin it button, Twitter, and Facebook right there, right at the top of each episode screen thing. I mean, right there, right out in front of you where you can get that out there. There's also a little thing that's got a little P out on the very end of the little brick line of sharing buttons. And if you'll click on that, that opens up a huge window full of sharing options for you that include Facebook, and basically it says this is all of them. You can go to that, and that's where you would share it in places like Reddit and Google Plus and things like that. So I encourage you to do that. And then the last way you can get in touch with me, and I'd love to be able to put your voice on the air if you've got a story to tell, do it this way. It's through the voicemail line, and that voicemail line is 706-408-7456. Let me say that once again because I hit a bad place in the road and I don't know how that's going to obstruct my voice, but 706-408-7456. That's how you can leave me a voicemail and leave me some feedback on the voicemail line. So, until next time, I'm Michael Blackston. You've been sitting alongside me in the passenger seat, driving toward Conway, South Carolina on this very early morning trip. I thank you so much for keeping me company, and together, we're going to continue to learn to live life 1 mile at a time.